Hey guys, what's going on? It's Rekt Capital and welcome back to the Rekt Capital channel. Thanks so much for joining me in today's video about whether or not the crash that we saw in Bitcoin's price action has broken the Bitcoin 4-year cycle. Subscribe to the channel for more videos like this in the future, and let's dive right in. So this is the 4-year cycle for Bitcoin. It constitutes 1, 2, 3, 4 candles, and we're seeing this 4-year cycle right over here. This is of course the first chart that I shared in March of 2020, and you can see that after that crash in March 2020, just have a look at how that downward wick was produced. This was a chart from March 3rd, and this was a chart from May 4th. So you can see how a downward wick was produced on that March 2020 crash, but in the grander scheme of things, you can notice how that March 2020 crash of 50% or even more, you can notice how in the grander scheme of the 4-year cycle, that crash didn't matter much, because if you think about the 4-year cycle, it is formed by halving events, and the blue lines here constitute the halving. And every year prior to the candle 1, you see a halving event form right over here in the year prior to each candle 1. So essentially speaking, the halving event finishes up the previous 4-year cycle. The halving event right over here finishes up the previous 4-year cycle. So fast forward to January 4th of this year, you can see how the halving event, of course, ended the previous 4-year cycle, and here as well. And candle 4 precedes candle 1, and of course candle 1 tends to be the most explosive in terms of growth because of the halving event. The halving event represents a fundamental shift in the blockchain protocol where the amount of Bitcoin created every 10 minutes is cut in half, and that influences the price of Bitcoin. In the past, halving events have preceded fantastic new candle 1s in a new 4-year cycle, and this has happened in the past as well, right over here and here. So this was a halving event in May 2020, and candle 1 is supposed to enjoy that exponential growth, and we're only halfway through the year. It is June at the moment, and what we need to think about is, of course, diminishing returns in terms of the candle bodies. You can just have a look here at the 4-year cycle right over here. This candle 1 in 2013, when the halving event occurred the year prior, this candle body, even if we just measure it like this, you can notice that this candle body is much bigger than this candle body, and you're seeing that we are declining in the rate of returns. And if we just reduce the rate of returns by the same constant, so this is approximately the candle body, so this is essentially the amount by which this candle is smaller, but a conservative amount, because remember, I was just measuring the candle bodies. You can see that there are wicks here, wicks over here, and wicks over here as well, and even a small downside wick here as well. So if we just extrapolate by a conservative estimate, just by the candle bodies, ignoring wicks which do and can be quite volatile and do rally to quite high price levels, if we just appropriate and extrapolate this candle body, then we'll reach about a $90,000 Bitcoin. But if we, of course, extrapolate these candle bodies and the candle wicks and still think about price in terms of the declining, diminishing rate of return, then we will rally to $1,000 or at least $150,000 in candle 1. And that's just something to talk about and think about, because if we just focus on the candle bodies, yes, this is going to be a conservative extrapolation. And essentially, you can see that these arrows over here showcase the diminishing rate of return to 90,000 for Bitcoin. But of course, the more exponential estimate would be a little bit higher to 150,000. And if we were to further extrapolate the 4-year cycle, through the lens of this exponential, more exponential projection, where we rally to 150,000, essentially speaking, this would be the year where we see the most explosive growth. Of course, we are halfway through in terms of time. It is June, so we are halfway through this candle 1 year. But according to price history, if this 4-year cycle continues to rally towards the upside and continues as it has been doing, we'll still see a new all-time high this year. Next year, we'll see a new bear market of an average retracement of 84.5%, and then followed by a candle 3 in 2023 where we bottom out, followed by yet another candle 4, which is essentially the recovery candle after the bottoming out candle, that is candle 3. So if this 4-year cycle continues, this is the sort of trajectory that we'll be able to see going forward over the next few years. But has this crash for Bitcoin in 2021, has that changed the complexion of the 4-year cycle at all? Well, I spoke about this and I touched upon it earlier in this video, that the March 2020 crash didn't really change much in the grander scheme of the 4-year cycle. The 4-year cycle still played out. In fact, it was even more exponential because candle 4 right over here eclipsed the old all-time high of 20,000, whereas right over here, candle 4 didn't do that. It didn't eclipse the old all-time high set by candle 1 in 2013. So it's funny how this was supposed to be a cataclysmic, devastating crash that would change the complexion of Bitcoin and would just go against all those bullish predictions. But in fact, this downward wick changed nothing in the grander scheme of things, in the macro scale of the 4-year cycle, in the same way that the crash in 2013 that we saw mid-cycle, that 80% crash, well, you can't really see this crash over here. You can't see that mid-cycle correction in this candle 1 because after that mid-cycle correction of 80%, Bitcoin rallied to even new all-time highs yet again. So if you just zoom out and focus on the higher time frame picture, the macro perspective, the 4-year cycles for Bitcoin, you'll notice how the mid-cycle correction, the mid-cycle crash in 2013 didn't really change anything in the grander scheme of the 4-year cycle. And in fact, you can't see that mid-cycle correction. You can't really see the March 2020 correction to around $4,000 because it's just as a wick. In fact, we saw much more bullish price action and new all-time highs later that year. It's interesting that this current crash for Bitcoin's price action in 2021, we're also quite worried about it, but it's probably a mid-cycle correction, much like the one we saw here, that we can't see here because of how things changed later on and how the exponential candle 1 reached new all-time highs later. So chances are that we'll see something similar in this candle 1 where this current crash of 53% won't be evident in this candle 1 later in the year once we get that candle 1 close in December, on the 31st of December, 1st of January next year. So that's my view. This entire crash hasn't broken the 4-year cycle. It hasn't broken it for the same reasons that this mid-cycle correction didn't break the 4-year cycle back then, that the March 2020 crash didn't break the 4-year cycle. In fact, it elevated this cycle a little bit with that bullishness. And I'm sure that this crash will also not impact this 4-year cycle. If anything, perhaps this 4-year cycle could start to change into something else going forward. We might not see a very simple version of the 4-year cycle. We could see this cycle lengthen depending on how long this retracement period of 53% continues. Will it be an extended drawdown? Will it be an extended consolidation period? Will we see this candle 1 be divided into candle 1 and 2 where the bear market would come in candle 3? It's difficult to say at this time because it really does depend on how long this retracement period will continue. But if we continue as history has suggested in the past, in 2013, then we'll see a recovery in a few months and we'll see this candle 1 build towards the upside. And in that case, we'd see this 4-year cycle, this new 4-year cycle continue towards the upside and try to mimic something like this extrapolation, all things being considered and remaining constant through the lens of history. This is what this current 4-year cycle would look like. But of course, there is that argument of lengthening cycles, but that really does depend on how long this retracement period will last and how quick Bitcoin will recover in this bull run. And having said that, guys, that's about it for today's video update. Thank you so much for watching. Subscribe to the channel for more videos like this in the future. And of course, like the video if you enjoyed this one. Thank you so much for watching today. I'm Rekt Capital, and I'll speak to you in the next one. Speak to you soon.